The Haunter of the Dark.
19 Nocturne Boulevard.
Nocturne Boulevard? Not far. When you hit Howard, hang a right. Howard meets Phillip at a weird kind of angle. Then you cross James and Poe. You can't miss Nocturne. It's just past the Automatic.
19 Nocturne Boulevard. Your address for suspenseful stories of the speculative, strange, and supernatural. Tonight's story is...
Haunter of the Dark. Sounds like you have a winner right there, Edward.
Yes? This is 19 Nocturne Boulevard. Won't you step inside? Did you have any trouble finding it? What do you mean, what kind of a place is it? Why, it's déjà vu.
Try this one.
Thanks. And I appreciate you putting us up tonight, Charles.
In my own interest, I assure you. I've no wish to climb 5 flights of rickety stairs and squat in your cramped dormer just to hear a story.
And I have no wish to disappoint you.
We'll just look at this as my way of supporting the arts, shall we?
Though you really can't knock the cramped dormer for atmosphere.
Here we are.
There you are.
Aha! Where did you have to go for it? China?
I knew I had a few of these still lying around. Just take one to start. They're wicked sour. Richard?
Perhaps just one.
I tried many kinds of native confectionery in my travels back in the day. Ooh. Ah, yes, much like the salted ginger prunes I tried in Hong Kong in 1907.
So jaded, Warren. Aren't you having one, Herbert?
I've never understood the point of discomforting oneself by eating painful food.
Oh, it's really quite tasty.
I'll stick to my drink, thank you very much.
Can't blame you, though I find myself rather more partial to these than I ought. So, Edward?
Right, of course.
Isn't this supposed to be a true story?
Yes, why do you ask?
Why the manuscript, then? How can we trust anything you've written down to be fact, and not one of your fantastical fictions?
He has a point.
Oh, that's simple. I didn't write any of this.
Here. Well, it's certainly not your handwriting. Is it some long-lost maiden aunt?
Copperplate. Quaint.
Let me look. Spiky.
Are the experts satisfied?
I reserve judgment.
I'm not such a stickler for provenance. After all, you're not one of my students.
Tell us then, Scheherazade, who is it that inspired this tale?
Robert Blake.
Blake? This is Blake's? What is it? How did you get it?
All in good time. This is all that's left of Robert Blake. You were about to say? Blake died 17 days ago during a storm that knocked out half the electricity in the city. Died under very peculiar circumstances indeed.
And for those of us less acquainted with the deceased.
Huh?
Yes. Who was Robert Blake?
You haven't heard of him?
I vaguely recall something about a Blake. Isn't he some kind of artist? Considered rather blasphemous?
Blake was a writer and a painter, yes.
But I was under the impression he was long dead. A century or more.
No. Robert died 17 days ago.
Oh, I expect you're thinking of William Blake.
The one who painted the Great Red Dragon and the woman clothed in the sun?
I don't waste precious memory on such trivia. I can put names to 3 paintings. The Mona Lisa, The Last Supper, and Whistler's Mother. And that's only because those are ubiquitous.
Any chance that the 2 painting Blakes are connected somehow?
Dunno. Could be. Robert hailed from Milwaukee, but I don't know anything more about his family. It would explain some of Robert's peculiar artistic leanings.
I've met Blake, this Blake, on several occasions. I can't say I liked him, but I didn't dislike him either. His work was rather unusual, though I'm only acquainted with his paintings.
Well, his writing was just as odd, both fiction and non. This is supposedly the latter. A journal. His last days.
How did you come by it?
Well, let me start at the beginning. Blake and I had been informally acquainted for years. We interacted through the magazines that carried our works, corresponded now and then, and lampooned each other a bit. I wrote a mad protagonist once named Blake Roberts, and he, in turn...
His paintings show no trace of a sense of humor.
There's more to any man than shows in his public face.
Who said that?
Thought I did.
Never mind.
Blake?
Cautious investigators will hesitate to challenge the common belief that Robert Blake was killed by lightning or by some profound nervous shock derived from an electrical discharge.
Lightning? I thought he died in his room.
Was he burned?
No, not at all.
But all the papers put it down to lightning.
I know I'm more used to writing a story than telling it, but you fellows should give me some room to breathe here. Stop jumping on me every time I come up for air.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry.
So sorry.
Sorry.
I have seen the dark universe yawning, where the black planets roll without aim, where they roll in their horror unheeded, without knowledge or luster or name.
Yours or his?
His. All right. Now, I have written some notes to follow, condensing some of this and including some outside information, so don't get confused. Blake died with a horrible expression on his face. The police and coroner blame it on the sudden contraction of the musculature due to the sudden ingress of electricity.
It's not unheard of.
But the entries of his diary might suggest another source of the horrible grimace. Fear.
Scared to death?
Or scared at the moment of death. Either way, it's no doubt he worked himself up into a state of absolute terror shortly before his demise. His diary entries are clearly the result of a fantastic imagination aroused by certain local superstitions.
Local to here?
Providence.
Rhode Island.
Blake was a writer and painter devoted to the field of myth, dream, terror, and superstition.
Sounds like someone we know.
His end began with a deserted church on Federal Hill.
What denomination?
The notes don't say what it started as, but it probably doesn't matter. It was bought and rededicated to something called the Starry Wisdom Sect.
Starry Wisdom? Astronomers?
There's definitely some stargazing involved in their beliefs.
Starry wisdom. I've heard something about them. It will come to me.
He took up residence in Providence last winter, in the upper floor of a venerable dwelling where huge, friendly cats sun themselves atop a convenient shed.
He writes about cats?
He was an only child, wasn't he?
He also writes a lot about the local architecture, but I'll skip that as well.
My desk faces a window commanding a splendid view of the lower town's outspread roofs and the mystical sunsets that flame behind them.
Cats and sunsets.
Some 2 miles away rose the spectral hump of Federal Hill.
I have a curious sense that I gaze out upon some unknown, ethereal world which might or might not vanish in dream if I ever tried to seek it out and enter it in person.
Blake settled down to write and paint. During that first winter, he produced 5 of his best-known short stories. The Burrower Beneath, The Stairs in the Crypt.
Oh, that was a corker.
You actually read this nonsense?
Of course. Have a subscription and all.
Blake also painted 7 canvases that season. Studies of nameless, unhuman monsters and profoundly alien, non-terrestrial landscapes.
My favorites. If I do say so myself, though, I do better with beings, while he should have stuck to exteriors.
But the church kept drawing his thoughts.
At sunset, the great tapering steeple loomed blackly against the flaming sky.
Makes me wish I was more familiar with Providence.
Blake made his first and only pilgrimage to the building just before the aeon-shadowed Walpurgis time.
What?
Also known as May Eve. Ostensibly, it's the festival of St. Walpurga.
There's a name for you.
What was she the saint of?
Not my area. But I say ostensibly, since it was one of those pagan holidays that the church found it couldn't quite ever abolish, so they replaced it, figuring if the populace wanted a holy day, it might as well be a proper Catholic one.
And the pagan holiday it replaced?
Beltane, a spring fertility festival. It was the counterpart to All Hallows' Eve. Note that they fall on opposite ends of the calendar.
The nights that witches fly.
So, he took a walk sometime in late April.
I noted the foreign signs over curious shops in brown, decade-weathered buildings. Now and then a battered church facade or crumbling spire came into sight, but never the blackened pile I sought.
It was like a labyrinth. None of the streets went anywhere. When he asked a shopkeeper about the church, the man's face blanched with fear, and Blake saw him make a curious sign with his right hand.
Does it say what the sign looked like? Perhaps something like this?
Isn't that the same hand gesture you see in ancient paintings of sages and saints?
It appears often in Hindu art as well.
Suddenly, a black spire stood out against the cloudy sky to the left. Twice I'd lost my way, but somehow dared not ask any help.
And then he was there, in a wind-swept, open square, towered over by the grim bulk of the decrepit church.
I wondered how the panes of the Gothic windows could have survived, in view of the known habits of small boys the world over.
I think we all had our turn in our youth. Why, I remember...
Knee breeches and buckle shoes. When you write your own reminiscences and then die in a strange and terrifying way, then we can discuss it. Go on, Edward.
It took Blake some time, both to clear the fence and to find a shiftable basement window. But finally, he was inside.
The colossal nave was an almost eldritch place with its drifts of dust. Over all this hushed desolation played a hideous leaden light as the declining afternoon sun sent its rays through the strange, half-blackened panes of the great apsidal windows.
The stained glass windows seemed to give Blake a nervous moment, both because they were heavily encrusted with soot and, in a more subtle way, from the subject matter.
The few saints depicted bore expressions distinctly open to criticism, while one of the windows seemed to show merely a dark space with spirals of curious luminosity scattered about in it.
Open to criticism? That's all he said? That conjures up far too many possibilities.
That's all.
Oh, they could be cannibalistic, or lascivious, or even cross-eyed.
Don't know. In a back room, Blake found shelves of mildewed, disintegrating books.
They were the black, forbidden things which most sane people have never heard of, or have heard only in furtive, timorous whispers.
You know the type.
Oh, yes, but did he give any details?
Well, there's a whole list, but it's not really germane to what we're trying to...
Resign yourself, dear boy. Let Warren salivate a bit.
Here.
Excellent. Necronomicon. Yes, in Latin. That would be the Vermis translation.
He also grabbed a small notebook filled with entries in some cryptic code.
The Libri Bonus. Sinister. The infamous cult de ghouls of Count Derlet.
You sound like a zealot saying his rosaries, or whatever they say.
He sounds like a collector.
If only. But I must be satisfied caring for the collections of others. Most of these books shouldn't be in the hands of any individual anyway. They're much too...
Evil?
Evil is a construct of morality.
Oh, Lord.
As is religion.
I don't think a book at least can be evil. You can only be evil if you have free will.
Oh, now this is my field, and when I tell you that the Unersprechen Kulten of von Junst, or old Ludwig Prinz Hellish die Vermis Mysterious, is an evil book, you may take my word. Hey!
You may have it back at the end of class.
So... room full of creepy books. Blake takes the diary, goes upstairs. Right. Aha!
Oh. Best watch that.
Yeah.
What is it?
A box. What does it look like?
Let's see. Blake found a room upstairs, faintly lit by screened windows. In one corner, a ladder led up to the closed trapdoor of the windowless steeple.
In the center of the dust-laden floor rose a curiously angled stone pillar, some 4 feet in height and 2 in diameter, covered on each side with bizarre, crudely incised, and wholly unrecognizable hieroglyphs.
On this pillar rested a metal box of peculiarly asymmetrical form.
Ah, boxes.
Asymmetrical? Nothing more specific?
That's all his notes say.
How unspecific. Asymmetrical merely means lacking in symmetry, which in turn means without any axis you could draw, which could create a mirror image one side to the other.
Huh?
Symmetrical means the same on both sides.
Mirror image on both sides.
Right. So, for instance, your face is symmetrical.
No human face is perfectly symmetrical. Nothing lines up exactly if you look close enough.
Roughly symmetrical, then. You have an eye on each side of a nose, which has two nostrils to balance one another, and so on.
So, as a way to picture an asymmetrical face, you might have an eye down on the jawline or on the nose up at the temple.
Only if there wasn't a comparable eye and nose to match on the other side of the face.
So, was this box only as asymmetrical as a typical face? Or was it grossly unbalanced?
The notes just say asymmetrical.
Layman.
That box isn't important anyway. It's long gone. But what it held.
Beneath the decade-deep dust was an egg-shaped or irregularly spherical object some 4 inches through.
Irregularly spherical?
Oh, not again.
The 4-inch irregular sphere turned out, once the dust was gone, to be a nearly black, red striated polyhedron with many irregular flat surfaces. Either a very remarkable crystal of some sort or an artificial object of carved and highly polished mineral matter.
Crystals form naturally according to...
Hush.
So it was carved that way. Good point.
Once exposed, it exerted an almost alarming fascination. I could scarcely tear my eyes from it.
But he did. I mean, he must have, since he notes there was something else in the room. Or should I say, someone. In the far corner, right at the foot of the ladder, was a hump of dust.
Hand and handkerchief soon revealed a human skeleton. I examined a reporter's badge, a celluloid advertising calendar for 1893, some cards with the name Edwin M. Lillibridge, and a paper covered with penciled memoranda.
Blake copied the text into his diary for fear the paper would eventually crumble away to nothing.
I think I'll have another.
Well, not that box. I mean, the candy is in your box. Over there.
Oh, how forgetful of me.
What is it with the boxes?
The notes were typical journalistic jottings, a list of dates and events, all involving the church. Yeah, from Professor Enoch Bowen, home from Egypt, May 1844. Buys church in July. The notes list a number of instances of people speaking or acting against starry wisdom. Oh, and finally, in April 1877, a number of members were apparently run out of town for their beliefs.
That's what I've been trying to remember. Starry wisdom indeed. Were they accused of human sacrifice?
The notes do list a number of disappearances attributed to them. Yeah, here, see for yourself.
Because, of course, no one ever leaves home of their own accord.
The community around was mostly Catholic. Pretty tightly knit.
Tightly wound, too, from the sound of it. Here it says that a mob of Irish boys, shouldn't that be lads, attacked the church, but it doesn't say what came of it.
Well, the locals assumed whatever was going on was devil worship. That's certainly why Lillibridge broke in.
They say the shining trapezohedron shows them heaven and other worlds, and that the haunter of the dark tells them secrets.
Did Lillibridge fall off the ladder? That could easily snap a man's neck, given enough height or the proper trajectory.
The cause was uncertain.
I stooped over the gleaming bones. Some of them were badly scattered, and a few seemed oddly dissolved at the ends. The skull was in a very peculiar state, stained yellow, with a charred aperture in the top, as if some powerful acid had eaten through the solid bone.
Well, before he realized it, Blake found himself staring at the trapezohedron again, and letting its curious influence call up images in his head.
And beyond all else, I glimpsed An infinite gulf of darkness, where solid and semi-solid forms were known only by their windy stirrings, and cloudy patterns of force seemed to superimpose order on chaos and hold forth a key to all the paradoxes and arcana of the worlds we know.
Purple prose.
It's very evocative.
There are certain primitive tribes who ingest drugs to glimpse just such visions.
Not another.
No, really. I was just about to say that if there was some item that caused visions, it could easily have become the central focus of a religious cabal.
Good and concise.
If I was going to wax on, it would be to draw a comparison to the myth of Pandora, or some other famous myth regarding the dangers of curiosity.
Well, thank goodness you restrained yourself.
Blake finally managed to pull himself away. Probably noticed that day was waning, and he hadn't thought to bring a torch.
It was then, in the gathering twilight, that I thought I saw a faint trace of luminosity in the crazily angled stone. Was there a subtle phosphorescence of radioactivity about the thing?
Finally, something I can grasp. Radioactivity is a concrete scientific essence, and could easily be the source of any number of superstitious explanations.
If it comes up again, we'll consult you.
I seized the cover of the long open box and snapped it down. At the sharp click of that closing, a soft, stirring sound seemed to come from the steeple's eternal blackness overhead, beyond the trap door.
That finally frightened him, and he plunged wildly out in the street, running all the way home.
Didn't get lost this time.
I don't suppose the church is still there. You said this all happened fairly recently?
It burned down the day after Blake's death.
Blast! Evil or not, those books are a great loss to the general body of human knowledge.
During the days that followed, Blake did a lot of research and worked feverishly at the cryptogram in the notebook.
I do like a good cryptogram.
He says he solved the code in June, but didn't bother to include an actual translation in here. There are sketchy references to a haunter of the dark that could be awakened by someone gazing into the shining trapezohedron.
You mean just as he had looked into it?
And he clearly believed that he had inadvertently summoned it.
Like Pandora, letting the cat out of the bag, or rather the monsters out of the box.
He didn't open the box. He just gazed into the stone. The box was already open.
A metaphorical opening of the way, then. Still amounts to the same thing.
Some creature from an undefined place regarded this stone as what? The operator on its personal telephone exchange?
Well, he felt like it was just watching for its chance to walk abroad. He also notes, however, that the streetlights seem to keep it trapped, forming a bulwark of light against its escape.
Throughout history, light has been the enemy of evil, whether it's sunlight causing harm to a shade, or a reversion to human of a lycanthrope at the dawn.
And ghosts don't walk around by day. It would fade their sheets.
Blake writes a lot about the shining trapezohedron, calling it a window on all time and space, and trying to trace its largely unbelievable history.
Unbelievable?
Brought up from some other sphere or planet by some elder race.
That's just superstitious claptrap repackaged for a modern age. Any number of objects have fallen to Earth with origins clearly outside what we think of as the normal world.
I heard about a meteor up north that had some quite terrible effects.
And yet, they have no root in evil, beyond what we attribute to them. Science doesn't shy away the way religion does. We don't just hang a sign on it that says, "Here there be dragons," and nervously turn our backs. Science grows to encompass new information.
Like an amoeba absorbs its food.
I suppose that's one way of picturing it.
Realms beyond.
Blake seemed to think that the only way to banish the evil was to bury the stone and let daylight into the steeple. At the same time, however, Blake goes on at some length about his morbid longing to gaze again into the cosmic secrets of the glowing stone.
Impressionable people should stay out of certain fields of endeavor. People with fragile minds are better left to the arts than to science or investigations into the unknown.
I'll have you know that art can be a terrible wretch of a mistress.
With science, you can work your entire life and never get a single word of encouragement.
Academia is entirely indifferent to any of us who toil in her fields.
At least your field moves forward slowly enough that by the time someone proves your theory wrong, you've been dead long enough to be an exhibit yourself.
Shall we put them in opposite corners? or have them construct essays on their misconduct.
There aren't enough corners, even in your house.
My apologies.
So sorry. Pray, go on.
The morning of July 17. Something in the paper really set Blake off. During the night, a storm had put the city's lighting system out for a full hour.
I'll bet that didn't go over well.
Well, the superstitious locals ran mad. They surrounded the old church, brandishing candles and lamps.
A vigil.
And shuddered at the horrible noises coming from within.
I know a few buildings I regard that way.
Soon after, in daytime, reporters broke in and found the dust within was all churned up. There was also a bad odor everywhere, and here and there were bits of stained yellow and patches of what looked like charring.
Similar to the bones? Did anyone ever run any scientific tests on any of this residue?
Not that I have any note on. The reporters noted the stone pillar, but the metal box and the old mutilated skeleton were not mentioned.
Gone or simply overlooked?
The newspapers love to print prurient details.
How prurient is a rock in a box?
From this point onwards, Blake's diary shows a mounting tide of horror and apprehension. He frantically telephoned the electric light company more than once, asking, even demanding, that desperate precautions be taken to avoid another loss of power.
My worst fears concerned the unholy rapport I felt existed between my mind and that lurking horror in the distant steeple. That monstrous thing of night which my rashness had called out of the ultimate black spaces.
Sounds like he should have invested his last dollar in safety lanterns.
And a trip to the tropics.
People calling on him at that time remember how he would sit and stare out of the west window. He spoke often of strange dreams, not nightmares precisely, but eerily similar to the vision he'd had when he gazed into the stone.
Sounds almost like shell shock, the way memories come back to haunt soldiers.
Well, it got worse. He kept stout cords near his bed so he could bind his ankles at night to prevent himself from somnambulism.
I had a friend had to do that once. If the struggle to get out of bed didn't waken him, the falling flat on his face certainly would.
I thought often of the ancient legends of ultimate chaos, at whose center sprawls the blind, idiot god Azathoth, lord of all things, encircled by his flopping horde of mindless and amorphous dancers, and lulled by the thin, monotonous piping of a demoniac flute held in nameless paws.
Azathoth. Now there's a name to conjure with, or not to, preferably. Probably best not to mention it at all.
The night of the 30th, Blake came to suddenly, finding himself in a horribly familiar darkened space. A panic flight ensued, leaving him senseless until morning.
Are you saying he managed to sleepwalk all the way across town?
Well, the next morning he found himself lying on his study floor, fully dressed. Dirt and cobwebs covered him, and every inch of his body sore and bruised. He writes that his hair was badly scorched, and a trace of a strange, evil odor clung to his clothing. It was then that his nerves broke down.
I think he was way overdue.
While I don't understand the phenomena of sleepwalking, I do accept that it occurs.
How big of you?
But while one might walk in such a fugue-like state, would one take such niceties as getting dressed into consideration?
It's probably much like a state of mesmerism. One does what one is told to do.
But if no one told him...
Should be obvious. We've all been told enough times in our lives not to go outside without a jacket.
August 8th. The great storm broke just before midnight. Lightning struck in all parts of the city, and a couple of remarkable fireballs were reported. Blake was utterly frantic and recorded everything in his diary.
Did he write that he was frantic?
It was more the tone of the things he did write. But his handwriting is very telling, too. See?
Interesting.
Ah, yes. The way it changes, getting bigger and less readable.
Also harder to write once the lights go out.
Well, that hadn't happened yet. See, he's still fretting over it right here. The lights must not go.
It knows where I am.
I must destroy it, and...
It is calling to me, but perhaps it means no injury this time.
Are found scattered down two of the pages, ending with...
Lights out! God help me!
At 2:35, the noises of the steeple swelled. Then, a sound of splintering wood and a large, heavy object crashed down in the yard beneath the frowning easterly facade.
Where were the praying multitude?
Right there. Whom do you think was left to tell the tale? In fact, just as the escape was made, with a vibration as of flapping wings, a sudden east-blowing wind snatched off hats and wrenched dripping umbrellas from the crowd.
Dousing all the tiny pinpricks of the candles.
Quite literally, if the downpour was that prodigious.
They must have managed to get some of their lights relit, for they remained at their posts. The rain didn't stop for another half hour, and shortly after that, the electric lights came back on.
You have quite comprehensive narration, considering the burden of fear the watchers must have been laboring under.
The papers gave these matters minor mention in connection with the general storm reports. I suspect reporters, being what they are, were present during the events.
Perhaps someone writing sensational fiction dropped in for a cold chill.
The one thing that baffled press and meteorologists alike was a lone lightning bolt that seemed to have struck somewhere in Blake's neighborhood, though no trace of its striking could afterwards be found.
Until?
Precisely. When a policeman forced the door, Blake's rigid body sat bolt upright at his desk by the window, with glassy, bulging eyes and the look of stark, convulsive fright on his twisted features. They were, reportedly, quite sickened.
Police are such delicate flowers, always being sickened by things.
Looking at such damage objectively, a face of fear is much the same as a face in pain. It's all in the attribution the onlooker gives to the damage.
The coroner's physician made an examination, and despite the unbroken window, reported the death as the result of electrical shock, or rather, nervous tension induced by electrical discharge.
Electricity is not an entirely understood element, even now. New possibilities and capabilities are being discovered every day. I've often thought myself that electricity might be the key to, say, restarting a stopped heart.
If you don't want a stopped heart yourself, Herbert, pray let Edward finish. We're nearly to a conclusion, if I don't miss my guess. I think I'll turn out the electric lights. Leave us in the dark like Blake. Edward can keep the candle.
There isn't really a nice, convenient ending, just another larger question mark. Blake prolonged his frenzied jottings to the last. In fact, the broken-pointed pencil was found clutched in his spasmodically contracted right hand.
Spontaneous rigor, not uncommon in cases of sudden catastrophic death, leads to the so-called death grip of detective fiction.
The entries after the failure of the lights are highly disjointed and legible only in part.
Light still out. Must be 5 minutes now. Everything depends on lightning. Yog-Sothoth grants it will keep up.
Yog-Sothoth?
Some ancient deity I'm not familiar with.
Some influence seems beating through it. Rain and thunder and wind deafen. The thing is taking hold of my mind. What am I afraid of? Is it not an avatar of Nyarlathotep, who in antique and shadowy Kem even took the form of man?
Nyarlathotep, the mysterious dark man who can take many forms.
The long, winging flight through the void cannot cross the universe of light. Recreated by the thoughts caught in the shining trapezohedron, ascended through the horrible abysses of radiance.
Lost his mind completely.
I think he agreed with you.
My name is Blake. Robert Harrison Blake of 620 East Knapp Street, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I am on this planet.
As if he was trying to find his way home.
Yog-Sothoth, have mercy. The lightning no longer flashes. Horrible! I can see everything with a monstrous sense that is not sight. Light is dark, and dark is light. I am it, and it is I. I want to get out, must get out and unify the forces. It knows where I am. I am Robert Blake, but I see the tower in the dark. There is a monstrous odor, senses transfixed, bordering at the tower window, cracking and giving way. Yag! I see it coming here. Hellwind, Titan blue, black wing. Yog-Sothoth, save me! The three-lobed burning eye!
I can almost smell the sulfuric tang.
I certainly can. Something must be burning.
Burning? Nonsense.
There's definitely a smell.
Someone here just couldn't stand the suspense, could you, Richard?
Moi?
Suspense?
It wasn't a very good joke, but the box, this box, contained just enough sulfur to make a good pong if anyone got nosy and opened it to see if I really had the shining trapezohedron.
I suppose that, much like Pandora, there are certain things that you can never get back into a box.
Now that you know how to find us, don't be a stranger. We have enough of those already. In tonight's episode, Edward was Bryan Hendrickson. Blake was Derek Fetters. Charles was Michael Coleman of Tales of the Extraordinary. Warren was Glen Hallstrom. Richard was Philemon Vanderbeck, and Herbert was Carl Cubbedge. Music tonight was by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. The cover art for this episode was by Brett Coulstock. Sound effects were found on Soundsnap.com and Sonomic.com. Sound and mastering was done by Julie Hoverson. The opening theme was by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. The opening credits featured Cole Hornaday, Renaud LaBeouf, and Julie Hoverson. All persons, places, and events in this story were fictitious or used in a fictitious manner and are not meant to reflect any persons, places, or things, living, dead, or undead. Questions? Comments? We would love to hear from you. Contact us at 19nocturne@live.com. That's 19nocturne. Or check out our website at www.19nocturneboulevard.com. Or join us in the 19 Nocturne Boulevard forum over at audiodramatalk.com. This presentation is copyright 2010 to Julie Hoverson and Reality Productions. Comte is Comte. OM is one of the nasal things in French. Comte d'Erlet. The Comte d'Erlet. Oh, shit! Oh, that fucker! Derleth. It's fucking August Derleth, isn't it? Oh, that bastard. Sorry.